Hi everyone, this is Mella from Mella Reads. I am not sitting in front of my bookshelves today because I am going to try and do sort of a review of Lady Chatterley's Lover slash possibly a little bit of an analysis and discussion, and I would love to hear from any of you who have read it or seen any adaptations in the comments. Let me know if you agree or disagree with me. And I haven't like fully written an essay or anything for this, but I have made some notes. This is the copy I read from the library, and it is due to go back, so I need to do this video and my post-it notes because I actually found quite a lot of this interesting. So I read it through once, just sort of not really knowing what to expect, and then I did a second skim read where I've sort of popped in my notes as I went, and there's a couple of things I wanted to speak about. So the first thing, the plot, if you're not familiar or if it's been a while, you've got Lady Chatterley. She marries a man named Clifford, who is injured in the war. This is World War I, and they return to his family seat. His family are low-level aristocracy, so they're in the Midlands of England. The estate has a colliery attached, so there's sort of this rise of industry occurring right on their doorstep. Connie has gone from this quite almost bohemian upbringing in the upper intelligentsia sort of classes, but not in the aristocracy, where she's studied on mainland Europe, and she's had a bit of a love affair at a young age, and now she's settled down with this man who, as a result of the war, is injured. He's paralyzed, and so he's stuck in a chair, and they're kind of just stuck on his estate. He takes up writing, she supports him in this, and for a while their marriage is quite vital based on that and the other intellectuals that come to their home and talk to them about ideas and this concept they call the mental life. But eventually Connie is Lady Chatterley. She starts to decline. She sinks into a sort of depression. She isn't getting the meaning and the joy from her life that she was hoping to. She does take up an affair with a playwright named Michaelis, who is described even by Connie as a sad dog. He's a bit of a pathetic man. I couldn't get much of a read on him, but I do know that Connie thinks she loves him, but I think what she loves in him, that's starting to get into the analysis, is that recognition of another beaten down soul in her world and that they can connect. But their actual love-making connection isn't great. But again, I think it's just those people like clinging for anything in a world that they don't feel like they fit into. And so sort of after that, or during that affair, Connie meets their new gamekeeper, Oliver Mellows, and the affair between them arises quite slowly. I think I was a good way through the book before we even met Mellows, who is the eponymous Lady Chatterley's lover, and even further before there started being any loving between them. It sort of, from there, the story, like their affair blossoms, and then it's about how can they make it work in this world and the restrictions and expectations around them. And that's sort of where the novel ends, is them trying to make that work, for better or worse, and you don't really see if they succeed or not. A couple of major themes in the book are definitely the role of nature versus industry, or like what's natural for mankind and what's civilized, or where have we ended up or brought ourselves. And this is just post World War I, so about 100 years ago, and already there's discussions in there that humans have lost something about themselves, or they're no longer what they were meant to be. And sort of tied into that is a lot of discussion around gender roles, and the men are no longer men and the women are no longer women. The women are trying to be men, and the men have become ineffectual, and those sorts of things come up a lot through it. And I really enjoy both of those themes, so that was good. Controversies that you may have heard of this book, and that's probably how I came across it, is that Lady Chatterley's Lover was originally self-published by D.H. Lawrence in Italy. He couldn't get it published in the UK, Britain as it were, and he couldn't get it published by a mainstream publisher. It was banned in a lot of Western countries up until the 1960s. And the main reason for that was a couple of certain four-letter words you may be familiar with, and their use is sprinkled throughout the novel. And as I said in my last video, I feel that the way they are used is quite natural in the way that people do use those words, but obviously doesn't meet certain moral standards of that time and place, and for that reason the book was banned. There is also a scene in which there is anal, and I guess even today that can be considered quite taboo. You know, that's in the novel, it's very shrouded. I almost didn't realize that's what I was reading. I just thought it was some very passionate lovemaking. So it's not explicit by any means. If you didn't know anal was a thing, you might not even pick up on it. But those are the main reasons it was controversial / banned. And for that reason, it has a bit of a reputation. However, I was expecting it to be racy, not knowing the exact reasons until I looked it up, that it had been banned or struggled to get published originally. I thought that the affair was somehow more spicy, or the depiction of it was more spicy, but really, and I think this ties into something that I do like about this novel. A lot of the lovemaking between Connie and Mellows is actually more about what's going on for her mentally and emotionally rather than the mechanics of it. I think that's how I missed the anal in that scene, because she's describing her emotional reactions to what they're doing rather than the physicality. Earlier on in the novel, she does have more ambivalence. She'll have moments where, even though she's in the throes, she is only observing the physical machinations of a man and a woman having intercourse. And when you look at it just strictly for like a physical act, it can be quite repulsive. Connie certainly describes it as such. But it's when you bring in the other heartwarming stuff or the other attraction and desire that it becomes something that is much more than just the mechanics. And I think that D.H. Lawrence does a really good job of showing how the range of ways people can engage in intercourse. On that note, Lady Chatterley's Lover is very much a woman having intercourse with a man. It's POV. It's, apart from the anal, there's like nothing that leads up to it really any given time that's described in terms of foreplay or surrounding play or any other sort of sensual acts really. And for me, as a modern reader, I feel that it demonstrates a lack of understanding of what the act can be, or certainly what women often would like it to be or would like to get from it. And I don't know what that says about D.H. Lawrence and his sex life, but it's something that, I just feel like Lady Chatterley's world's opened up and it's amazing, and she feels so feminine and sensual and all of these things from actual physical acts that may not be the whole picture for a lot of people. Okay, so I have quite a lot of points of interest, as you can tell from my post-its in the book, but I've tried to pull out some things that I think are my thoughts that may not be common thoughts or that may be of interest. So I'll go into that bit now. The first point I did make is about Connie seeing Michaelis as an expression of her latent, undirected sexual yearning. At that point in time, she cannot fulfill that with her husband Clifford, and Michaelis is just a man who is there and sort of throws himself upon her, and again that recognition of another beaten down soul, and she mistakes it for love, but I think it's just a strange sort of companionship and intimacy. And actually that reminds me of a phrase earlier in the book when Connie marries Clifford during World War One, and they have all the intimacy of two lovers together on a sinking ship or something like that. It's a really beautiful expression because, of course, everything's heightened in a situation such as that, where you feel there's nothing else left for you. And I think that Connie almost sees that here with Michaelis as well. I also wanted to raise Connie having her earlier sexual encounters before Melrose. She describes using men to achieve her fruition, and then later in the book when Melrose is talking about part of why his marriage didn't work out, it seems that a really large part of it is that his wife was aggressive sexually and he just could not handle that. And the way he describes her, particularly bringing herself to an orgasm whilst sort of using him, is something that Connie herself has done, not so explicitly in her first teenage romance, but in that one she used sex as a means of gaining conversational intimacy with a man. It was almost just a price she had to pay for that conversation and intellectual engagement. And then when she's with Michaelis, she describes very literally after he's finished that she uses him inside of her until she is also finished. And she never enacts that sort of process with Melrose. There is something about the way Melrose and Connie are attracted to each other and they work together as a relationship to people that brings out something in them that they haven't necessarily had brought out with other partners or other romantic interests. And I think that is really interesting. In a way, they both open up and become more alive in a way that is just mutually beneficial for both of them. And there is one of the more distinctive scenes in the novel is Connie weaving like wildflowers into both of their hairs, all of their bodily hairs, and I think it's a really beautiful sort of metaphor for the way they've bloomed through their relationship with one another. As cheesy as that sounds when I say it out loud, I think that both of them had more or less given up on that being possible, but somehow they achieve it. How exactly they achieve it, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure if D.H. Lawrence is sure either. It is something that happens to us sometimes. We meet someone that's just the right fit for what we need and what they need, and we're able to give it to one another despite all of the other stuff around us and in our lives beforehand and currently. I do wonder, from the way D.H. Lawrence has written these scenes about the women using the men after the men are finished so that the women can finish, if this was a thing at the time that men were concerned about women doing, if this was a thing that D.H. Lawrence had an issue with personally, or if it resonated more widely, and I have no idea. But it's the only time I've read something like this, either in a contemporary text or further along back in time, so I'm not sure if you know. Maybe I don't need to know, but it is, something I found interesting. Another thing I picked up on in this text that I haven't seen any discussions of elsewhere is I have a feeling that Melrose is bisexual. And as I said in my last video, I am bisexual. Maybe I identify with it when it's not necessarily there. I want to see it represented as, the natural thing that it is and as common as it is in the real world. And I have a few passages that I've marked out where Melrose talks about his relationship specifically with his colonel during World War One. And it's acknowledged both by Melrose and other parties that he and his colonel loved one another. They had a intimate relationship. And I believe that, especially in a situation like war, again, it's those two people on a sinking ship, right? You see something, you recognize something in one another in a situation where everything's sort of a mess, it's falling apart, and you maybe build an intimacy that you wouldn't otherwise, or you cling to each other more than you would have otherwise. I'm not sure if that's what was the case with Mellows and the Colonel. They certainly are described as having loved one another. When the Colonel passes away, Mellows seems like he was more or less distraught by it. He was so sick at the time himself that he couldn't fully comprehend it. But then once he did, I think that's when he left the military, because he couldn't go on without the Colonel. And there's also, aside from the constant references of him and the Colonel loving one another, which I get is an ambiguous statement, there's also something towards the very end when he and Connie are talking about what he brings to their relationship. Because when they're at the point of running away together, Connie's got money coming in, she's got a title, she's a lady, and he's just this gamekeeper. He's got nothing to offer in terms of what success is marked by in their society. Connie says that what he has that's most valuable, that other men don't, and that will make the future, is the courage of his own tenderness. And then he says, not only is that correct, but he knew it with the men in the army. I had to be in touch with them physically and not go back on it. I had to be bodily aware of them and a bit tender to them, even if I put them through hell. It's as though he goes on to talk about natural physical tenderness, which is best even between men in a proper manly way, and it makes them more manly. And I'm not sure exactly what D.H. Lawrence is getting at, or what he's trying to get Mellows to get at, but it's just really interesting to me that when Connie identified the thing in Mellows that's most valuable to her and the future of humanity, which may or may not be on a good path by the judgment of this book, he brings it immediately to the men in the army. And I just like to imagine that there's something there, whether it was latent and unacknowledged, but still something, Let me know if you think I'm completely barking up the wrong tree with that, or if you see it as well. I'd be very interested. Another point I made was about the writing of sex, as I'm a very rookie writer myself of romance. It's not writing about the mechanics that is interesting to people. In fact, it can be quite disgusting, as Connie describes it. But what makes it special and relatable to people are all of the emotional processes and thought processes going on while we're doing it. And I think, D.H. Lawrence did a really good job of depicting the possible ambivalence, but also both types of writing about sex. And in this case, it served a really good purpose. The last point I have here is about why the book ends when it does and how it does. I was listening to a couple of podcasts, actually. I'll acknowledge them in my description box, but one of them, they were quite critical of this book, and they didn't like a lot of things about it, but one of the things they didn't like was the ending, because it's open-ended. And I mean, there's arguments for and against an open-ended ending, but I think I prefer it to everything neatly tied up in a box, because it leaves you wanting more. And as a reader, whether there's a sequel or not, I want to be left wanting more, because otherwise, I'm done. I don't know quite how to describe it, but again, this might just be personal preference. So I appreciate something like Pride and Prejudice, where at the end, sort of 3 of the 4 daughters are set into their couplings, and what's going to happen to them. Basically, Austen even gives you a little bit of a future wrap up of their lives, how they play out, and that's kind of nice and neat. But at the same time, if it had been left on more of a cliffhanger where Darcy and Lizzie have just gotten to the point of being able to acknowledge that they want to be together, but maybe you don't know exactly how it's going to play out or if it's going to work because of how different they are in some ways. I would be totally okay with that too, because a big part of my engagement with a book is my own imaginary world around it, my headcanon around it, and I enjoy that process and engaging with that, and I don't think it's a problem if I'm given space to do that as a reader. I also wanted to pull out some of the more interesting quotes from Lady Chatterley's lover. This is getting very long though, so I might just stick a couple of them in the description box or the comments. And if you've stuck with me this far, I hope the audio is a little bit better because I'm using a different microphone. I mean, I hope I've set it up right. And apart from that, please let me know your thoughts on any of my thoughts about this little book. I thoroughly enjoyed it for what it is, and I think this is a recurring theme for me. I have to take a book for what it is, not what I'm hoping it will be, not what I think it should have been, or if it was written now, or if I wrote it. It's for what it is, and this was a really nice little book about a woman growing into a life she'd never envisioned for herself, but she finds herself a really good fit and really happy with it, and there's potential there that she, you know, lives happily ever after. Maybe she doesn't, but it's a nice little insight into a part of a woman's life at a point in time. And thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.